The United Arab Emirates, or the UAE, is dependent on the energy sector and tourism. Those two sectors were the most affected by this crisis, and without the normalization of traveling, there's no tourists, and without economic activity, there's no need for energy. As a result, the tourism sector is suffering, and the energy price is low. Those two factors might have a multiply effect on the other area of the economy. Thus, we can say this pandemic was a major blow to the United Arab Emirates economy. The question is this the end of the UAE? So, let's start by looking at the economy. When it comes to the economy, it seems like the UAE is just doing fine. The financial agencies predicted that the UAE economy will contract by 6% this year. I can expect this number to be a little bit higher. Anyway, if we take in consideration that UAE had economic output of $421 billion in 2019 and its citizens had a purchasing power PPP of $655 billion and also a Gini purchasing power per capita of $7,000, we can say that a reduction of 6.6% will not be that devastating. Now let's look to the other areas, the energy sector. The UAE has a lot of its revenue come from the energy sector. Thus, the decline in the energy sector had an impact on the UAE national budget. However, we should remind ourselves that the UAE managed to diversify its economy at the point that the oil revenue only represents 30% of its national economy. Thus, the UAE economy will not suffer that much, especially if we compare with the country that solely rely on the energy sector for its revenue. I'm talking about countries like Venezuela and Angola. Carry on, the tourism industry or the traveling industry. The UAE received the most generous and profitable tourists. They are not in the same caliber as those backpackers traveling to Asia type of tourists. People who travel or just visit the UAE tend to spend a great deal of money because they want to get the whole experience. The spending starts at the duty free at the airport and then to the hotels and local shopping. The revenue from those spending tend to fuel the UAE local economy or just the internal economy. For this reason, the negative effect of this crisis will be most noticeable on the tourism sector and the economy around it. Without tourists, there's less money coming in. As a result, a lot of local shops will close. The aviation will reduce its capacity. The hotels will not have enough customers to keep the business going. The taxi drivers will not have enough riders. And now the people who depend on this section of the economy will be affected. Most likely, there will be layoff and bankruptcy. And people who lose their source of income tend to be very vocal. That's why we see all this information in the media about the UAE. It's their survival after all. Not only that, if people don't have job, they cannot rent an apartment, let alone pay their bills. If shops are not making money, they cannot rent the facility as well. Both of those two factors will have a negative effect on the real estate industry. But not only that, but also the bank industry, because some of those real estate were acquired with debit. And if the people cannot pay their debit or mortgage, the bank will not get any money, let alone profit. But that's just in theory. Banks always find a way to get their money back, and make money out of a crisis. Anyway, we can resume all those sentences in simple words. The economy is connected. Despite of that, the UAE will be fine and will be there. You might not, but that's your problem. This is not the first crisis in the Gulf region and will not be the last one. But saying that it will be the end of UAE is just pure exaggeration. People tend to forget that UAE is like a fiscal paradise. When the world is burning, the fiscal paradise tend to become a safe haven. Just have a look at the UAE exchange rates. The dinar is a stable currency. It means that their export and import relation is balanced and the currency basket is well managed. And also, it shows that people believe in the UAE dinar. Anyway, a stable currency is one of the characteristics of a fiscal paradise or a financial paradise. Now you might be wondering, what does it mean for you? Well, a currency is backed by a country, and the relevance of a currency depends on how people perceive that particular country. If people believe that UAE economy will collapse, they will dump the UAE currency in drove. As a result, the UAE currency will plunge or drop like Zimbabwe currency. But that didn't happen, did it? No, it did not happen, which means people believe in the stability of the UAE economy and its relevance in the long run. I'm talking about more than 5 and 10 years. Otherwise, why will they keep the UAE dinar or even save their money in dinar? It makes no sense. So we can safely say that people believe in the UAE economy. Anyway, that's just my opinion. The UAE economic crisis is not as big as you might think or as the media is saying. The crises that those Gulf countries are facing are not economic, but it is identity crisis. But that's a topic for another video. Oh, I almost forgot to talk about the expats or foreigner workers. I'm gonna use simple words to explain this matter. As long as there's economic opportunities for foreigners and expats, there will always be foreigners. It's very simple. If there's money and there's money to give, there will be people to take it. So, there will always be people willing to work in the Emirates or the UAE, especially young people with the low economic prospect in their own countries. So when you see or hear people saying that there will not be expat or foreigner workers, it's just pure exaggeration. There will always be people willing to work in the UAE. We gotta remember, the foreigners working in the UAE are not immigrants. The immigrant part was never in the agreement. The Gulf is a place that you go for working and business. You build yourself up while you are contribute to their economy. It's not an immigrant destination, so don't get that attached because you are there for working and maybe for business. So get your feelings and emotion in order. That area was never an immigrant destination. It was always a place of transition. It was like that even before the UAE became a country. There's a reason why the UAE is not an immigrant destination. The reason is geography. That part of the world is not sustainable to handle a lot of human life. Otherwise, it would be populated long time ago.